Shalom and welcome to Biblical Faith with Sam Peak. We invite you to join us as Sam brings a study in the Torah from the Jewish sages. And now our speaker, Sam Peak.
So Shalom Aleichem. I'm always glad to be with you, and even though everybody's dragging tonight, we're coming to the end of the week and everything. Honestly, if we'll study a little bit from the Torah, it will pick us up. I'm sure of it. It will absolutely pick us up. So we're studying the Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the fathers, sometimes called the ethics of the fathers, the advice of the fathers, and the musar of the fathers. Whatever, it's the fathers, it's the sages' advice to us on how to live and on how to be a good functioning person in the world, especially a Torah person. And there's so much truth in everything that they say. So we've come along. We're actually in chapter 2, and we've come to Mishnah number 2. Now I know the last time we were together we finished with that. I want to just start, and we're using actually the commentary of the Maharal of Prague that was put together in a book that's published actually by Art Scroll called Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Tuvia Basser was the nice rabbi who put it all together. And but mainly coming from the commentary of the Maharal of Prague. So Mishnah number 2 of chapter 2, let's start and read the whole Mishnah. Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, says, Torah study is good together with, and they translate here, proper social conduct, and that's fine. For the exertion of them both makes sin forgotten, and all Torah study that is not joined with work will cease in the end and leads to sin. All who exert themselves for the community should exert themselves for the sake of heaven, and then the merit of their fathers aids them, and their righteousness endures forever. Nevertheless, as for you, I, meaning Hashem, will bestow upon you as great a reward as if you had accomplished it on your own. Okay, that's a big Mishnah. That's a lot of stuff that's going on there. And we need to begin to just start to pick it apart. That's what the sages expect us to do, because I promise you that's what they do. And so let's do that along with the Maharal. And this is page 81, Mishnah number 2. He begins by telling us, he says, Rabbi Gamliel's advice appropriately follows that of his father, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, also known just simply as Rabbi, in the previous Mishnah. Rabbi's words encompassed good character attributes and the performance of the mitzvot which bring a person to the world to come. But he approached the subject in general terms, Rabbi did, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And his son now gives us specific advice regarding proper social conduct. The word actually in Hebrew is derek eretz, the way of the land, okay? The way we're expected to act. Manners. Social manners is also a good way to translate it. And he says, advice regarding proper social conduct in this world, because that's actually a preparation for the world to come. Although the value, he says, of proper social conduct is, the value of it is less than that of the mitzvot, of keeping the commandments. It's not on the same level. It precedes the mitzvot, it comes before them in this way. One must first conduct himself properly in society before he can even begin to acquire the Torah. And they have a note here, which actually, this note actually comes from Vayikra Rabbah in section 9, this midrash, where they say proper social conduct, derek eretz, preceded the Torah by 26 generations. In other words, the 26 generations from Adam HaRishon to Moses, it's not that they didn't know the Torah. We know that the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, knew the Torah very well, but they didn't have a written Torah out there. But before that, what was it that they had? They had derek eretz, proper social conduct, the way to treat other people, the way to get along in the world. This all is Torah. Okay, all right. Okay. So he wants to go. He says that Torah study is good together with proper social conduct. He says the Hebrew phrase, Yafeh Talmud Torah im derech eretz, meaning it's nice, it's very beautiful to study the Torah, but with derech eretz, with proper social conduct. He says this phrase in Hebrew implies that proper social conduct is actually primary and Torah study is subordinate. That's what it implies. That's what we think it's saying. But surely, the Maharal says, Torah study is what's primary. That's what really comes first. Rabban Gamliel does not mean, he says, to imply that proper social conduct is more important than Torah study. He means that spiritual matters actually have to be observed in the correct sequence. Proper social conduct comes first, and Torah comes afterwards. Proper social behavior must precede, he says, excuse me, Torah study to provide the right environment for it. It is definitely not adequate to study Torah and to perform the mitzvot without engaging in social norms like working or in good conduct. What he's saying is actually, it's a very interesting thing. We can't be hypocritical and we can't be treating our neighbors or treating other people in an almost criminal way, which unfortunately a lot of people do just with their tongues. And then study Torah and think that it's doing us any good, because it's doing Torah as much as it is studying Torah. If a study without doing is just not, this is the whole point. Okay. He said this fact stems from the very nature of human development. In other words, that proper social conduct needs to come first. Lesser intellectual skills, he says, like walking, those develop first, and only later do greater intellectual skills like reading develop. He says, since intellectual growth must be built on a physical foundation, we also have to gain pragmatic social skills and then address our efforts to the intellectual endeavor of Torah study. Okay, let's move that out of the way. I think it's pretty simple that the Rabban Gamliel is not trying to say that proper social conduct is more important than Torah study. That's not what he's saying. Now he picks up the next phrase, the Maharal does, and says, "For the exertion of them both makes sin forgotten." The exertion of what? Both proper social conduct and study of the Torah. Now listen to some of the things the Maharal says here are absolutely fantastic of what he picks up, and this needs to be geared into our thinking. This is one of those things that we have to kind of change the way we think. He says, one who is complete, a person who is complete. In other words, there's nothing left to add to that person. They can't grow anymore. They can't learn anymore. He says, that person, or excuse me, that's not what he's saying right here. One who is complete, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun because I was reading him earlier and I'm trying to apply a totally different idea there, so scratch that. Excuse me. One who is complete, he says, is remote from sin. And by complete here, he's meaning someone who is both, who acts right with people, talks right with people, and is a student of the Torah. But he says the opposite is also true. Sin is synonymous with deficiency. Now that's something we should plug in, because that's not the way most of us think about sin. Sin is synonymous with something that's lacking, deficiency. He says the human being has both physical and spiritual components, and both of those, both the physical components and the spiritual components, are subject to deficiency. Proper social conduct, he says, rounds out or develops the practical side of life, while Torah study perfects the spiritual side of life. Through the pursuit of both of them together, then we are complete in both aspects and hence remote from sin. If a person devotes his personal development entirely just to practical matters, or entirely just just to Torah study without regard for his physical needs, then he remains undeveloped in the other major aspect. And that deficiency promotes the further deficiency of sin. In other words, this is why they're saying both of these things have to go together. Again, concerning the exertion of them both. He says exertion. Now doesn't that sound right? I mean, it's exertion means you sweat. It means you work at this. It's not something that you can just lay aside and think it's going to happen all by itself. Exertion is essential, he says, to avoiding sin. And the reason that this is what the Maharal is saying, and this is a beautiful, unbelievable saying of his, because sin is always found with repose. And here's where I got confused. All right, we'll get it. What does he mean by that? Rabbi Basser puts a note down here. Repose, on repose. Complacency invites deterioration. And we said in the previous paragraph that deficiency, and that's what deterioration is, it's a deficiency, promotes the further deficiency of sin. Let's go on. He says, in this world of inevitable change, things improve until they are complete or finished. And at that point, the point that they're finished, that they've reached their maximum potential, the only change that is possible is for the worse. Do we get it? Listen to what he's saying. He said, an illustration of this from daily life, deterioration is the inevitable next step for a flower, a bloom in its prime. Once it reaches a certain point, we're talking about things in the physical world, once it reaches a certain point, then it begins to wither. Or a ripe fruit, okay, a fruit can reach a certain point and then it begins to go down. Or for a person in his prime, a human being, meaning the body of a human being, reaches a certain point that's the prime moment, and then so it's complete, it's finished, and the only place it can go now is down. That's the only change that's left for it. And this world is a world of inevitable change. At that point, he says the only change possible is actually for the worse. And what he's trying to say here is that now he wants to take this idea and apply it to our spiritual side, our souls. If we take that attitude with our souls, we think our souls reach a certain point. And if we think that we have grown as much as we can possibly grow, all right, we have learned as much as we have possibly learned, we have made the tikkun as much as we can possibly make the tikkun, then we're still in this world, then the only place it can go is down, if that's what we're thinking. In other words, so we get to a certain point and we stop because we don't think we can go any further. We finish. And this is what he's saying. He says, to relax spiritually, and this is also physically also, but to relax is to act as if one had achieved completeness, and that immediately sets in motion the destructive forces that are personified as the Satan, Satan, or the evil inclination, or the angel of death. And the reason he mentions all three of them, this is from the Talmud, Bava Batra 16a, that these are different personifications of the single destructive force in the universe that acts to the detriment of human beings. The Yetzer Hara, Hasatan, and Malak HaMavet. The evil inclination, the Satan, and the angel of death. They're all one and the same. In contrast, he says, exertion implies and tells us, exertion implies that perfection has not yet been achieved. As long as we're working, as long as we haven't relaxed and think we've arrived spiritually and think there's nothing else for us to learn and there's no more level for our soul to grow, he says, so exertion implies that perfection has not yet been achieved. Since growth, we're still growing, in other words, and growth is the opposite of deterioration, then the two do not coexist. They can't be in the same place at the same time. And the pursuit of personal growth will displace the degeneration and the deficiency that we call sin. His thinking is really very profound on this. Now, Rabbi Basser brings a quote from the Gra, from the Vilna Gaon, where it says, this thought is phrased very succinctly by the Vilna Gaon. And here's the quote: if a person does not continuously strive to rise higher and higher, then he will inevitably descend lower and lower. And this is from the Gra's work, Even Shlema, the perfect stone, actually. Stone of perfection, foundation of perfection. So if a person does not continuously strive to rise higher and higher, then he will inevitably descend lower and lower. Okay, in summary, he says, the Maharal says, the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, and the Satan, these personifications of desire and temptation to sin, are actually powerless against one who is still striving to grow. That's an amazing thing, what he is saying. And we need to really kind of take that and keep it with us, because this is, the Yetzer Hara, I promise you, does not want you to grow spiritually. And the way it usually does that, comes against you in things like that, is one of two ways. Number one, by actually beating you up and telling you that you're not worthy enough to even be, who do you think you are, studying Torah? You know, some of the things you think, say, and do, that totally puts you out of the ball game, and you have no business here. So that's one way. Or it makes you think that you're better than what you are. It makes you think that you're on a very high level and that you're really something, okay? Both of those ways. This is the way it stops you. But what the Maharal is trying to tell us here from the Mishnah of Rabban Gamliel is that he goes on, he says, if those inclinations, that power, the Yetzer Hara and the Satan, they are powerless against one who is still developing. If we have that attitude that we're still making the exertion to continue to grow and continue to develop. By working at self-improvement, he says, we demonstrate that we are not yet fully actualized. We're not completed yet. We're not have come to the state of perfection yet. Even a tzaddik, who really is a real tzaddik gamul, a real completed tzaddik, a finished one, he doesn't think that about himself. He doesn't think to himself, oh, I've arrived, I'm there, and there's nothing else for me to do. I mean, he never thinks that. He said, he said, you have to work at self-improvement and demonstrate that we are not yet fully actualized and that we are indeed prepared to grow further. That in and of itself, and this is the amazing thing to me, that actually displaces the destructive desire for sin, the Yetzer Hara, the Satan. They can't be in the same place at the same time. That's something. In contrast, he says, one who is complacent, that person acts as if he's already perfect, with no further prospect of growth. And he said, and we know that once a person in their head or in their thinking that they reach that place, they will consequently degenerate through sin, because that's the only place for them to go. And this world is a world of change. Like the Vilna Gaon is saying, if we're not going up, we're going down. One of the two. Okay. We'll go on a little further with him. He has a few more comments on this part of the Mishnah for the exertion of them both. What? Proper social conduct and the study of Torah makes sin forgotten. He says the human being has a physical component and a spiritual component, and continuous effort in both areas is necessary to escape the desire for sin that permeates both arenas of life. To explain this point in Kabbalistic terms, now the Maharal was a great, great Kabbalist, and he often gives us insight from the Kabbalah. So he says, to explain this point in Kabbalistic terms, there are two fundamental types of destructive desire. Number one, this is amazing what he says, the desire for illicit, illegal, physical gratification. In other words, to receive something in the area of the physical that's harmful to you, and so Hashem has made it illicit. By commandment. So the desire for illicit physical gratification, that's one. Two is the desire for illicit spiritual fulfillment. He says the pursuit of worldly requirements and the pursuit of Torah, those are the antidotes for these desires. The pursuit of material needs displaces the desire for illicit physical satisfaction. In other words, but with derek eretz, all right? That's the idea, with proper social conduct, in other words, pursue your livelihood, pursue everything that you have to have in the physical world, but you have to do it within the rules of society. You can't step outside of those lines because that makes it illicit physical gratification. So the pursuit of material needs, he says, displaces this desire for illicit physical satisfaction, while spiritual pursuits through the Torah, in other words, by developing yourself through the study of the Torah, that displaces the desire for spurious spiritual gratification, he says, such as pride. Now, he has a note here, Rabbi Basser does, that says, this is the author's adaptation. In other words, he's adapting something based on the Maharal's Chidushei Agadot to the statement in Sotah 4b in the Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan said, everyone who has a haughty spirit is as though he worshipped idols. Now what he's talking about there is in Hebrew, these two different desires, okay, or these two different pursuits or desires for illicit physical gratification, that's called yitzra de erva, which has to do with, literally, this is an Aramaic term that's used to describe a yetzer, an inclination, okay, for the physical. Lust, really, is what it's talking about. But the word that's used, the Aramaic term in the Talmud that's used for illicit spiritual fulfillment is yitzra de avodah zarah. This inclination for strange, avodah zarah is the word we use for idolatry, for worshiping strange gods, serving strange gods, okay? So that's what he is hooking this to, where it says, Rabbi Yochanan said, everyone who has a haughty spirit is as though he worshipped idols. Well, there's all kinds of things, to be truthful with you, that are actually idolatry that we don't really identify as idolatry. I've heard so many different definitions of idolatry, and I'm of course going to give you my own, but the one I have is so general, everything should fit. So where does pride come from? Pride comes from in the sense that we think we did something. We really think we accomplished something, and so we're very proud of it. And the reason that Rabbi Yochanan is regarding that as the same thing as idol worship is because we're actually thinking that we did something apart from Hashem, that He, in other words, we're an independent power. We exist independently from Him. To me, that's what idol worship actually is. That's what idolatry actually is. And to me, it's more in our thinking than it is anywhere else. Because in my humble opinion, if I had to make a definition of what idolatry actually is, it's any time that we regard any force, any power in the universe, including ourselves, as if we operated independently from God. As if we existed and operated outside of, that we don't come from Him, that He's not the one who's supplying everything, that He's not the one who is doing everything. And to be truthful with you, we don't, if we know that, then we don't have anything to be proud of in the sense of, other than that we live a life that is pleasing to Him, that pleases Him, and that is to the benefit of others. Those are the two things. This you can have an amount of spiritual pride, but that in and of itself is not really spiritual pride, because we know and we don't regard ourselves that we did it all by ourselves without His participation or without His or without his connection to it. So that's what idolatry is to me, and at least in my opinion. And it mainly exists in our head more than anything else. So it exists in our head, and then it ends up coming out of our mouths, and then it ends up going through our hands and everything that we do, because we think that powers in the universe, including ourselves, exist outside of Him, separate from Him, not under His control, all of those things. Anyway, okay. Didn't mean to get off on all of that. Oh, the next one, the next thing the Maharal is going to talk about concerning this Mishnah is when he says, all Torah study that is not joined with work will in the end, it will cease. In other words, the Torah study will cease. It comes to an end because it's not joined with work. And we'll just go until we're completely out of time. The Maharal says, work makes a person whole. And Torah study that is not accompanied by work, it will cease in the end. Why? Because the person himself is deficient. Something that's whole is not deficient. And he says, so if we're not working, then we're deficient. He says the person himself is deficient, and everything that is deficient does not endure. So as a result, our Torah study does not endure. He says this Mishnah tells us that a person who does not work is actually susceptible to sin in general. Why would that be so? We would expect, he says, that a lack of work would cause only the sin of dishonesty due to the need for money. In other words, the person, if they're not going to work, they're going to steal. Okay? They're going to be dishonest in some way and steal. However, he says, this Mishnah reveals a very fascinating principle. If a person does not work, he will find in his life that various sins, all kinds of different things, just arise unexpectedly, not that he's even looking for them. And this will be true, he says, even for a person who studies Torah. Even if that person is studying Torah but they don't work, also sin will come up. Now, he has a note here that says the reason is that the lack of a necessary component brings in its wake still further deficiency until one reaches the ultimate deficiency, which is sin. You understand what he's saying? So working is considered to be a deficiency, and we know sin is also a deficiency in life. So one of them just absolutely just leads to another. It happens that way. And it comes up no matter what, even if you're a person who is studying Torah. In contrast, he says, a person who is complete in body and soul, through the pursuit of both Torah study and work, will avert even sins which might normally have been expected. That's an interesting thing too. He says, in fact, now he brings something up and he says, in fact, there have been many Torah scholars who did not go to work. In fact, that's something that we do for a lot of Torah scholars. We support them so that their work is in the Torah. But I promise you, if anybody thinks that teaching Torah is not work, you don't know anything. I'm telling you, it's hard work. But anyway, this is what the Maharal says. The Maharal, this is what he considers work. He considers work as adding value to the world. Okay, either through building something or through service. Okay. As opposed, he says, to trade. He says, because trade is just buying and selling stuff that's already here. So when the Maharal talks about work, he's not talking about necessarily digging ditches. He's talking about adding value to the world, either through service or through building something. All right? Anyway, he says, in fact, there have been many Torah scholars who did not go to work, in the sense of people that they had an outside job. In some cases, he says, they were engaged in a trade, he says, which in their case is just as beneficial as work. But in other cases, their soul was so enamored of Torah that their love of the Torah itself, that is what sustained their Torah studies. Okay, so I hope I'm not confusing you. It's actually not so confusing. We know all of these things inside. We know them. We know what Rabban Gamliel is saying. We know it already. And so we'll just continue on. Anyway, how can we, there's not much more we can say about the wonderful world of Pirkei Avot. We'll just continue to go through them and learn little bits and pieces. We learned some really good things, I think, in this particular one, having to do with the Yetzer Hara and having to do that with continual growth, okay, in Torah study and spiritual growth. Okay, so we'll start again here the very next time we're together. So shalom uvracha to you, peace and a blessing.
Thank you for joining us in our study. If you enjoyed this study and are interested in learning more from the Torah and the sages of Israel, then check us out on the internet at www.bfm101.com, or you may contact us toll-free at 1-800-639-0169. Our mailing address is Biblical Faith, P.O. Box 2, Abilene, Texas 79604. Until next time, we wish you shalom uvracha, peace and a blessing.